Chapter 3, I didn't mean to, Cooty's voice came from the other side. Though the irony in his words still kept me guarded, something about the way he spoke felt strange enough to make me rise to my feet. Before the tears gathering in my eyes could fall, a grin slowly formed on Cooty's cheeks. Of course you know what I meant, he said, the grin lingering across his face. I forced a smile in return, though the truth still lay plainly before me. The whole scene left too many things in question. Father's reaction, for one. Of course, he would not remain furious if I explained myself well enough, but for how long would he continue trusting me? Mother was different. She still carried doubts about the stories I invented whenever I returned home late. Though father often believed the excuses I stitched together, mother's eyes always seemed to see beyond my lips. Of course I know it was meant for Kamada, I replied to Cooty, the boy standing before me, not that he was truly younger. In reality, I was 2 years younger than him. Perhaps that was one of the reasons I rarely failed to notice the bitterness hidden beneath his ironic words. Soon Kamada will fall into our hands, Cooty said, his eyes fixed on the paraffin spilled across the ground. Paying little attention to the paraffin itself, I sat beside a nearby thicket and tried to rehearse what I would later tell father. Thoughts tangled and unfolded in my mind faster than ever, as though whatever had happened no longer carried Cooty's fingerprints upon it. Soon enough, we had cleared the place and reset everything for the next trap. But this is not what we planned, Cooty, I whispered sharply as we hid in the nearby bush, watching Kamada emerge from the garden on the other side of the road. Of course, it was the path he always used on his way home. What if his father finds out? You know, Mr. Ieyasu is not the kind of man to joke with. He trusts his son deeply. Do you think he will simply believe a story like this when the truth is standing right before him? I tried to caution Cooty, but he seemed untouched by every word I spoke. Kamada drew closer. His tall figure moved steadily along the path, intimidating in its size yet strangely calm, as though danger had never once crossed his mind. Even in the fading evening light, his dark skin stood out boldly enough for us to recognize him more clearly with every step he took. I held onto Cooty's arm, though my trust in him stood dangerously close to breaking apart. There was something about his tricks that pulled me toward a world I barely understood, a side of life mother had always tried to keep far from me. Yet father constantly dismissed her fears, reminding her how my older sisters had grown up without such worries ever becoming real. Your only role is to taste whether there is enough salt in the soup, not question me about how to raise my children. Father's voice often thundered through the bedroom during their quarrels. Perhaps that was why mother hardly ever dared to shout at any of us whenever father was around. And now there I was, crouching inside a bush beside Cooty, a boy whose home stood only a few kilometers from ours. We had known each other for years. Ever since his family moved into the village 4 years earlier, we had played together almost every day. He was one of the few boys with whom I often played hide-and-seek. He had seen many sides of me. Sometimes, whenever mother punished me for one mischief or another, Cooty would stand quietly behind our house, eavesdropping on every raised voice that reached him. The following day, he would recount the entire scene to me as though he himself had been part of it. Before the age of 7, none of us had been allowed to attend the nearby government school, which stood nearly 10 miles away from the village of Malibu. Compared to ours, the neighboring village of Bukoda was far more developed. It had a health center, a government school, and a central market where nearby villages brought their harvests at the end of every season. Mr. Katamba often traveled there to buy supplies for his small shop. By now, the journey to Bukoda no longer felt mysterious. We had already begun school ourselves, and this was one of those long final term holidays, long enough for us to forget most of the things school had forced into our heads throughout the term. There he comes, Cooty whispered suddenly, pulling me away from my thoughts. Slowly, I stepped out of the bush, careful not to let Kamada notice where I had come from. The empty paraffin can hung loosely in my hands, my clothes stained with dirt, though I tried to behave as though nothing had happened. Soon enough, Kamada reached the exact spot we had chosen, and at that very moment I stumbled deliberately and threw myself onto the ground. My cry rang loudly through the road, loud enough for Mr. Ieyasu to hear from a distance and rush toward us. Behind me, Kamada froze in confusion. His towering figure remained motionless, his face struggling to understand what was unfolding before him. The moment I noticed Mr. Ieyasu approaching, I burst into louder sobs. Mr. Kiesu, he pushed me. Your son is heartless. He made me spill all the paraffin onto the ground. Kamada's eyes locked onto mine. Perhaps he could not believe I was capable of inventing such a cruel lie against him. Yet despite the confusion widening across his face, I continued crying. By the time Mr. Kiesu reached us, doubt was already written across his expression. Hardly had he stepped beside me when Cootie suddenly emerged from the other side of the road, pretending to have witnessed everything. Of course he pushed her, Cootie insisted, pointing directly at Kamada. He has always wanted to. Kamada still said nothing. He only swallowed hard, his mouth slightly open as though words themselves had abandoned him.